We need to get AI technology to disseminate in all corners of society and the economy because it makes people smarter, it makes people more creative. It helps people who don't necessarily have the technique to write a nicely put together piece of text or a picture or a video or music or whatever to be more creative, right? The creation tools, essentially. It may facilitate a lot of businesses, a lot of boring jobs that can be automated. In the long term, the similar effect as the invention of the printing press that had the effect of making people literate and smarter and more informed. So,
and some people tried to regulate that too.
Well, that's true. Actually, the printing press was banned in the Ottoman Empire, at least for Arabic. And some people say that, like the Minister of AI of the UAE says that this contributed to the decline of the Ottoman Empire.
The EU has some proposed regulation. Do you think that's the right kind?
It comes to regulating research and development and essentially making it very difficult for companies to open source their platforms, I think are very counterproductive. And in fact, the French, German, and Italian governments basically have blocked the legislation in front of the EU Parliament for that reason. They really want open source. And the reason they want open source is because imagine a future where everyone's interaction with the digital world is mediated by an AI system. Every one of us will have an AI assistant. So we'll have intelligent assistants living with us at all times. This will amplify our intelligence. Now, if you imagine this kind of future where all of our information diet is mediated by those AI systems, you do not want those things to be controlled by a small number of companies on the west coast of the US. It has to be an open platform, kind of like the internet. The internet is, all the software infrastructure of the internet is completely open source. And it's not by design, it's just that it's the most efficient way to have a platform that is safe, customizable, etc. For assistants, those systems will constitute the repository of all human knowledge and culture. You can't have that centralized. Everybody has to contribute to it, right? So it needs to be open.
So Mark Zuckerberg recently dropped a few bombshell announcements. One is Llama 3 is being trained right now. So one of the leading open source models will have sort of its next generation successor is being trained right now. And the second thing that he is kind of talking about, he wants to create AI and eventually AGI, and he wants it to be open source. And fueling the generative AI craze is a belief that the tech industry is on a path to achieving superhuman, godlike intelligence. So Mark Zuckerberg is going after AGI. However you want to define that, but he's going after it. Same thing with Demis Hassabis, the leader of the Google DeepMind team. Demis Hassabis actually recently tweeted something that was congratulating some of the people working for DeepMind about this new paper that they released. And he finished the tweet by saying, "One step closer to AGI." Now, he did edit that tweet to take that last part out. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in this article, it looks like there was an exclusive interview with Mark Zuckerberg. And I just wanted to highlight the quotes that Mark Zuckerberg said directly. So let's take a look at specifically what did Mark Zuckerberg say about this brand new thing that they're training and their new direction. So he's saying, we've come to this view that in order to build the products that we want to build, we need to build for general intelligence. I think that it's important to convey because a lot of the best researchers want to work on the more ambitious problems. Now, there's a huge battle for AI talent right now in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but also everywhere else in the world. $1 million a year plus is some of the salaries that people are getting. Apparently, Google has their own little secret fund of stocks that they give people who either come on board or stay on board of the AI team specifically. So there's this like extra compensation packages that are bestowed upon AI researchers. And so he's saying we're used to there being pretty intense talent wars, but there are different dynamics here with multiple companies going for the same profile and a lot of VCs and folks throwing money at different projects, making it easy for people to start different things externally. And they're putting their money where their mouth is because they've built quite an impressive collection of compute, of these GPUs, of these chips to train these AI models. So he's saying we have built quite the capacity to do this at a scale that may be larger than any other individual company. I think a lot of people may not appreciate that, which they're not kidding about that. So here's NVIDIA H100 GPU shipments by customer. And so this is estimated for the year 2023. So as you can see here at the very bottom here in the corner, there's some pretty big companies that are buying these things. Tesla, TikTok, Lambda, Alibaba.com, Baidu, CoreWeave, Tencent, Oracle, Amazon, Google. So these are some of the biggest, US tech companies, some of the biggest Chinese tech companies, right? And then there's this like mountain. So these are 3 times bigger, and that is Microsoft and Meta, aka Facebook. So this was the announcement that came out a few days ago. So here, Mark Zuckerberg is saying, number one, they're training the next generation model Llama 3, and we're building massive compute infrastructure to support our future roadmap, including 350K H100s by the end of this year. And overall, almost 600,000 H100 equivalent of compute if you include other GPUs. It's a little bit hard to understate how big these investments, these expenditures are. So Microsoft is currently conducting the largest infrastructure build-out that humanity has ever seen. While that may seem like hyperbole, look at the annual spend of mega projects like national rail networks, dams, or even space programs such as the Apollo moon landing. And they all pale in comparison to the more than 50 billion annual, so yearly spending on data centers Microsoft has spent in for 2024 and beyond. This infrastructure build out is aimed squarely at accelerating the path to AGI and bringing the intelligence of generative AI to every facet of life, from productivity applications to leisure. And here you can see that Zuck is neck to neck with Microsoft, at least, for this 1 year, for this one metric. But he's not playing around. Let's say that. So he's saying we've built up the capacity to do this at a scale that may be larger than any other individual company. I think a lot of people may not appreciate that. The interesting thing here is that Meta, they have their own model, Llama. Microsoft technically is relying on OpenAI and the GPT-4. And while it's kind of beginning to be a little bit difficult to know where Microsoft ends and OpenAI begins, I mean, they are sort of two separate entities. We saw when Sam Altman got pushed out of OpenAI late last year, that was like the big dramatic moment where Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, I mean, by some accounts, people said they've never seen him that mad ever before. Like he's a very charming, soft-spoken person, but it sounds like he was pissed because as they're shelling out massive amounts of money, I mean, again, some of the biggest infrastructure build-out projects that humanity has ever seen, right? They can't let somebody on the board mess around with the thing that they're building all this around. Next, Mark talks a little bit about how coding plays in with models. So is it important for models to be able to code well, to produce code? One hypothesis was that coding isn't that important because it's not like a lot of people are going to ask coding questions in WhatsApp. But it turns out that the coding is actually really important structurally for having the LLMs be able to understand the rigor and hierarchical structure of knowledge and just generally have more of an intuitive sense of logic. So Meta is training Llama 3 now, and it will have the code generating abilities, he says. And like Google's new Gemini model, another focus is on more advanced reasoning and planning capabilities. Now, Llama 2 wasn't an industry leading model, but it was the best open source model. With Llama 3 and beyond, our ambition is to build things that are at the state of the art and eventually the leading models of the industry. So we covered this paper a few days ago. This is self-rewarding language models. Notice this is a Meta. This is Facebook. This is the research that they're putting out along with NYU. And so here's a little training methodology that they're testing to see if these models are able to train themselves, to improve themselves. I'll post the video that I did breaking everything down in the description, but the basic point is, as this model begins to train itself, it works on kind of a loop. So you have version 1, after training becomes version 2, then this starts again, it's a loop, and then version 2 becomes version 3, and each time it improves itself, its ability to reason, its ability to train itself as well. So not only does it get better at doing the thing that you ask it to do, it also gets better at improving its own ability of doing the thing that you're asking it to do. So as you can see here, 1 versus 2 versus 3, each time it improves, it gets better. And as you can see here, it has a 20% win rate against GPT-4 Turbo. So in that one benchmark, you could say it's as good as GPT-4, the March version, as good as Mistral Medium. I mean, take that with a grain of salt. That's not exactly what it means, but the point here is that they found a way for the model to improve itself, to kind of sit there and round after round after round, keep getting better at the tasks that it's given until eventually it's competing with models that are more advanced, that tend to be higher on those leaderboards. The really big concept here is that normally, so for example, with GPT-4, we know that model was RLHF, so reinforcement learning with human feedback. So humans sat there and sort of corrected its behavior and helped it improve. They kind of fine-tuned it by telling it when it was doing something that was good and when it was doing something bad, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down, etc. But that is a bottleneck for training these models. It's expensive. Humans make mistakes. It's slow, right? So the question is, can the AIs themselves do that? Can it just teach itself? And this very strongly suggests that it really seems like the answer is yes. Yes, it can teach itself to become much better. And we probably can assume that the better models will be even better at teaching themselves. So it's kind of like this exponential improvement. That's just my guess, but I'd bet that that's the case. We will probably see that research coming out very soon showing that. And one interesting thing that this article mentions is that Zuckerberg wields total power at Meta thanks to his voting control over the company's stock. So that puts him in a uniquely powerful position that could be dangerously amplified if AGI is ever achieved. Now, again, that's the author's opinion, right? I'm not saying if that's right or that's wrong, but the point is, the board at OpenAI nearly imploded, and it was done by people that a lot of us, we didn't know who they were, what their motivations were necessarily. They weren't touring the world, talking to all the world leaders like Sam Altman was doing, right? So Sam Altman, Ilya Sutskever, Andrei Karpathy, Mira Murati, Greg Rockman, like all those people, they're in interviews, they're talking to the people, they're explaining their viewpoints. So when they're running OpenAI, I feel like a lot of people are, it's not like we just trust everybody 100%, but at least we're like, we know them, we know their opinions. We've watched, 3-hour-long interviews with them. We kind of get a feel for what they think. But if these people on the board that have their own sort of ideologies, what if they can come in and just completely reverse the course and take it in whatever direction they feel right? Some would say that's a danger as well, right? So having Zuckerberg wield total power at Meta, well, yes, that comes with its own dangers, but it also protects from certain other dangers. That it's an important point to understand that nothing is as clear cut as him having full control is bad. By the way, I did a quick survey before recording this video. So this has so far 672 votes. So it'll keep collecting more votes, more data will come in. But basically I just asked, how do you like Mark Zuckerberg? Do you think he's a good guy, a bad guy, etc.? So some people skipped and just wanted to see the answers, which is totally cool. I always provide that option so that it doesn't pollute the results, so people don't just choose something at random. About 20% say they never liked him, they never will. So their opinion of him has remained consistently negative. Some said that it improved over time. So basically they like him better now than they did in the past. 31%, so this is probably the biggest percentage of the respondents, they said neutral. So there's no strong feelings either way. 3% always liked them. So that's low, but it does seem like for whatever reason, there's very few people that are just like 100% just huge fans of his, which maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing because he just doesn't need to care about what people think. He can only improve, I guess. For me, I think I'm definitely probably in one of these two categories, either neutral, but I also think that my personal opinion of what he's doing has improved over time, but that comes with a bit of an asterisk because I think the reason it's happening is because of this guy, Yann LeCun. So he's the main sort of researcher at Meta. So he's the VP and chief AI scientist at Meta/Facebook, and he is a big proponent for open source AI. Maybe you could say one of the biggest. So he's out there talking to various government bodies, telling them, hey, we need OpenAI. He's banging the OpenAI drum. What I meant to say is that he's for open source AI, not OpenAI. Having Sam Altman's company be called OpenAI is a little bit confusing. So what I mean to say is this person is for open source AI. So for having all the weights of the models out there so people can see it, all the code that helps that model run. One of the things that I think people are a little bit confused by is so these AI, these neural nets, they're not coded in the same way that we think of software as being coded. It's like a video game. A large video game is a large collection of code. A software application is a large collection of code. Neural nets are not that. Their sort of main part is the collection of the weights and biases that make up the neural net. Now, on top of that, you have various code that helps it run. So if you have something like mixture of experts, we have multiple different sort of AI parts that are answering various questions. There might be some sort of a code that helps select which one runs at what time, etc. But a fully open AI, a fully open sourced AI, I think a lot of people would say is having full visibility into the weights of the model. So basically seeing exactly how the brain is built and also having visibility into the code that kind of runs in the background, helps it work. So for example, right now, I think people would say that one of the best open source competitors to what OpenAI has to the GPT-4 GPT 3.5. So out of the models that are hot on its tail, so one of the competitors is Mistral AI, right? This company out of France. They've released this Mistral 8 by 7 billion model. So this is the mixture of experts model, which it has been speculated that's part of the reason why GPT-4, for example, why it did so well, that it was also a mixture of experts model. So instead of thinking of it like one big model, one big blob that basically answers whatever questions you ask it, you might think of it as sort of 7 or 8 or 16, whatever that number is, of smaller submodels, each responsible for its own thing. So one might be great at analyzing sentiment, one at writing, one at code, etc. And so here specifically, so this is Mistral AI, this is their website. So they're saying it is the strongest open weight model. So in AI, you sort of have the inputs, and then you have the output, the prediction, the inference. You have kind of like the black box that is the AI model. And so the weights is one of the bigger sort of things that make that AI do what it does. So if you have open weights, that means you have a pretty big view into what that AI does, or at least how it's built. You don't necessarily know what it does, but at least you can replicate it, you can see how it's built. I think that's a simple but fair explanation of it. So they are open weight model with a permissive license. But back to Yann LeCun, my understanding is that he is the one that's really sort of pushing Mark Zuckerberg and has convinced him to really go all in on open source. I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg would just by himself decide to do that. I have no idea, but this to me seems like one of the bigger champions for the open source AI movement. This is the infamous "We Have No Moat" paper that was leaked out of Google, where they're saying the uncomfortable truth is we, as in Google, we aren't positioned to win this arms race. And neither is OpenAI. So they're saying as hard as Google is trying, as hard as OpenAI is trying, we're not going to win the race that is the race to AI or the race to AGI. They're saying while we've been fighting amongst each other, a third faction has been quietly eating our lunch. I'm talking, of course, about open source. And they give many different examples of how open source, just whatever leaks out there, whatever these big companies put out there, open source grabs it and they take it to the next level because somewhere, someone in the world just figures out some brilliant solution to improve it, to figure out how to make it better. And so while this paper, I don't know if it necessarily said that, but it's kind of saying like, hey, we have to embrace open source or be left behind. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I have no idea. I wasn't there, but I feel like maybe this person, Yann LeCun, went to Mark Zuckerberg and said, hey, we have this opportunity to become the #1 AI company, the AGI company, but it's going to be a little bit different than maybe what we're used to doing, what these big tech companies are used to doing. While OpenAI and Google and Microsoft, while they're building their own proprietary models, we go open source. We make basically the world our lab, right? That we make everyone a developer that wants to come in and work with us. Anybody that wants to work with our AI, we will let them. Anybody that wants to improve it, we will let them. And with that, they're hoping to get more users, more developers, more progress with everybody using and building upon their thing, Llama, for example, or whatever other AI platform, whatever other thing they have going on. And so here, Mark Zuckerberg continues in his interview. So here they're asking him a question, who will control AGI? So his answer, what Mark is saying, is that the playbook that Meta has followed so far for Llama, which can, at least for most use cases, be considered open source. And Mark says, I tend to think that one of the biggest challenges here will be that if you build something that's really valuable, then it ends up getting very concentrated. Whereas if you make it more open, then it addresses a large class of issues that might come about from unequal access to opportunity and value. So that's a big part of the whole open source vision. And then he contrasts kind of what OpenAI did versus what Meta's doing. There were all these companies that used to be open, used to publish all their work, and used to talk about how they were going to open source all their work. I think you see the dynamic of people just realizing, hey, this is going to be a really valuable thing. Let's not share it. The biggest companies that started off with the biggest leads are also, in a lot of cases, the ones calling the most for saying you need to put in all these guardrails on how everyone else builds AI. I'm sure some of them are legitimately concerned about safety, but it's a hell of a thing how much it lines up with their strategy. And so this is what a lot of people refer to as regulatory capture. So all these big companies with their labs, with their head start in AI, like if the goal is to just make as much money off of AI as possible, the playbook for that, we've seen it before, here in the States, and I'm sure in every other country in the world, but this idea of regulatory capture. So we go in and we are the ones that kind of lobby for more regulation, more government control. But we also kind of work with the regulators to create things that are beneficial for us, that will help us with the massive capital and all the infrastructure and stuff like that. Sort of, quote unquote, almost kind of like outlaw the competition, or at least build a huge moat preventing others from building competing products. If, let's say, Facebook has AGI and then it has the government of the United States outlaw anybody else from trying to build it, it has basically an AGI monopoly. So he's saying that Meta is publicly announcing that they're sort of the counterpoint to that. They will actually be working on having everything be open source, having it be more accessible, more democratic, more free, allowing people to use it for their businesses without restrictions. So if you build something really cool with it, you can make money from it. You don't have to pay a cut to Meta. And then he's saying for as long as it makes sense and is the safe and responsible thing to do, then I think we will generally want to lean towards open source. Obviously, you don't want to be locked into doing something because you said you would. So here's the Chatbot Arena leaderboard on huggingface.co. So if you haven't tried it yet, it's kind of interesting because basically if you wanted to, and everybody can do this, you can actually head to the Chatbot Arena and it'll give you sort of these two little windows where they will load two different LLMs. So whether that's GPT-4 or Llama or Mistral, Claude or Gemini. And so you give it a prompt and each one tries to answer your prompt and you select which one did better. Now you don't know which one's which. So you're blind to which model is doing the answering. You just know there's, model A and model B. And so you can give it one prompt or multiple until you figure out which one is better. And then you click, okay, I think this one's better or tied or whatever. And over time, I think we're approaching almost 250,000 votes. GPT-4 Turbo, as you can imagine, is at the top of the list by OpenAI, right? And then numbers 2 and 3 still GPT-4, just the older models. What's interesting is the March version of GPT-4 is higher than the June version. So remember when people said GPT-4 is getting lazy, it's not doing as well. Could this be, proof of that? Next, you have Claude, the model by Anthropic. Then you have Mistral, Claude 2 by Anthropic, then Mixtral, the mixture of experts, 8 by 7 billion parameters, so 8 experts by 7 billion parameters. Then you have Gemini Pro, so Google's version. I'll link this down below if you wanted to take a look. They have 55 different models. So what I like about this is you can ask it whatever questions you want. So you want to test it on how well it makes poetry, you can do that. How well it does reasoning, you can do that. How well it writes motivational speeches, you can do that. So whatever you want to ask it, it'll do that. But right now, it does seem like open source can be a viable competitor to these closed source models by these gargantuan companies. We don't know if they're ever going to be the number one model, but it certainly seems like maybe they can always catch up to the number one closed source model, maybe a year after it's released, right? As the open source community works to improve what they're doing. We can always have one that's, a year lagging behind, but we'll still have access to it. It'll be open. It's something that you can run on your own system potentially. And of course, this is where the big debate is. Is open source dangerous? Will it be dangerous to have stuff like this out there in the wild where, bad guys can use it? Or is it in fact a good thing because it's more accessible to everyone, where it's not going to be behind closed doors, where it's not going to be controlled by these massive corporations with government control around it? I mean, my take is open source does come with its own dangers. It's hard to just dismiss it and say, nope, nothing bad can ever happen. Certainly there's risks that people need to be aware of and working on how to reduce them, etc. But at the same time, it does seem like it's very important for the world to have open access to this technology as it starts replacing jobs or just giving people better productivity. If it can provide people with mental help or maybe legal help or maybe some sort of a training or coaching or stuff like that, it's going to be very valuable, very important. And if it's behind closed doors, then people can control how it behaves. They can inject their own political biases into it, right? It might not be allowed to be unbiased and answer certain questions in an unbiased way. It's going to be forced to say this specific thing that some people think that's the correct viewpoint for the world to have. So therefore, we're going to encode that into the model. But whatever the case, I think the point is that having models that are accessible to everyone, that aren't brainwashed to follow some political ideology, that are more like open, I think that's the way to go. Whether that's going to happen in a place like OpenAI or it's going to happen through an open source model, we have yet to see. But this is kind of an important thing to keep an eye on, because your ability to use AI, how much it's going to cost you to use it, how well it's going to be able to answer your questions, how well it's going to align with your viewpoints, I think will largely depend on how open they are allowed to be. That's it for me. My name is Wes Roth. Thank you for watching.